My husband was dying, but before he died, he insisted on divorcing me. He transferred all his assets and his company to me, leaving nothing for himself. That night, after we signed the divorce papers, he held me and cried his heart out. He said this was the last thing he could do for me. He didn't want me to become a widow whose husband died in the eyes of others. It was his only wish before death. As a wife who loved him deeply, how could I possibly say no? The night before we were supposed to collect the divorce certificate, he suddenly fell into a coma and was rushed to the hospital. The doctor issued a critical condition notice, and I signed the consent form to forgo treatment without hesitation. My husband didn't make it. He died on a stormy, rain-drenched night. I turned away, wiped the tears from my eyes, and smiled as I tore the divorce agreement to pieces. That same night, I called the funeral home. Before dawn, I had him sent straight to the crematorium and turned into a handful of ashes. Chapter 1. When the doctor told me that Bruno's vital signs had completely ceased, tears streamed down my face. Fighting back the grief, I called the funeral home. While they were moving the body, I gave each staff member an extra 500 yuan, asking them to please be gentle with my husband. I had wanted to spend one final night with him, to talk with him properly, but after arriving at the funeral home, I changed my mind. I asked one of the workers if they could cremate his body immediately. He touched the pocket where I had slipped the 500 yuan tip. Looking a bit troubled, our cremation service starts at 5:30 a.m. And it's only a little past 3 now. Let my husband be the first one today. I'll add 10,000 yuan. I pleaded with sincerity. As I spoke, I handed over our marriage certificate, ID cards, household registration book, and his death certificate. The staffer looked at the documents, then at my sincere expression, and nodded right away. Wait here, I'll call the team now. At 5:30 in the morning, the crematorium parking lot was already filled with a dozen buses and hearses. In the still air, faint cries of grief could be heard. I patted the urn in my arms and said, "Honey, look at our efficiency. They've just arrived, and I've already got you cremated." The box said nothing. Suddenly, I felt a wave of sorrow and wanted to cry. I looked up at the sky. A faint light was piercing through the darkness, gradually freeing itself from the grip of night. I looked down, and my tears fell onto the urn. Bruno, a brand new day is starting for me, and you'll be lying in this little box forever. Chapter 2. When my in-laws heard the news of my husband's death, they pounded their chests, wailed, and cried uncontrollably. When they learned that their precious son had been cremated overnight, one of them fainted, while the other slapped me twice. I was stunned by the slaps and couldn't recover for a while. I called the police. My in-laws also called the police. I reported my father-in-law for intentional injury, as after being slapped, I couldn't hear properly. They reported that I had cremated their son without their consent, preventing them from even seeing him one last time. Half an hour later, 2 sets of police officers arrived. The officers on my side told me to get a medical examination to determine if it constituted injury, in which case, they would hold the perpetrator accountable. The officers on my in-laws' side informed them that as a wife, I had the full right to handle my husband's cremation and funeral arrangements without needing the parents' approval. Summary: it was unethical, but legal. I took the urn from Bruno's study. Mom, Dad, what do you want me to do with Bruno's ashes? Should I take them to you, or would you like me to deliver them to you? My mother-in-law's eyes were bloodshot as she pointed at me, her lips trembling as she tried to curse me. But she stuttered, you, and couldn't finish. I pulled out Bruno's will. Mom, it's not that I didn't want to bury him. It's just that he asked me to give it to you and said you should bury him at Peach Blossom Hill. Finally, my mother-in-law seemed to grasp something, and she went wild, trying to rip at me. I timidly hid behind the police officers, only showing my head. If he had a will for his final arrangements, why did you cremate my son without our permission? My son, my poor child, my mother-in-law screamed and cried. The police officer looked at me seriously. One officer, responding to my in-laws' report, scolded me. As a wife, you are allowed to handle your husband's funeral arrangements, but if there was no will, you might be involved in illegal actions. My mother-in-law immediately stopped crying, her eyes now burning with a new light. I handed over the video and written version of Bruno's will to the police. My husband's will only asked that I give his ashes to his parents and that they bury him at Peach Blossom Hill. It didn't specify who should handle the cremation, nor did it mention waiting before cremation. The officer carefully read it 3 times, then returned the phone to me, nodding at my mother-in-law. She's right. If you suspect the will is fraudulent, you can go through legal proceedings. My mother-in-law rolled her eyes and almost passed out, while my father-in-law hurried to support her as they walked toward the room where they usually stayed upstairs. The police officer sighed as he watched them leave. Your family, why make things so complicated? Your actions were definitely inappropriate. Try to see it from their perspective. It's their son. And what you did, was it really fair to them? I remained silent. Fair? When they teamed up to deceive me and treated me like a fool, did they ever think about what was fair to me? Chapter 3. I discovered that my husband Bruno had been lying to me 3 months ago. His lung cancer, which had been under control, suddenly spread. That night, he coughed all night, coughing up a lot of blood, and only managed to fall asleep just before dawn, with swollen eyes and messy hair. I sat by the bed in utter despair, deeply staring at him, my fingers slowly tracing his handsome features. I desperately held back my sobs, terrified of waking him. When we went to the hospital for a checkup, it was discovered that he had developed multiple brain metastases. The doctor said the surgery would be extremely difficult. I couldn't even imagine how I would live after my husband left this world. We met and fell in love in college, and now, 14 years had passed since then. 6 years of dating, and 8 years of marriage. He had occupied 14 years of my life in my 30s. Bruno had been diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer 3 years ago. I accompanied him to various hospitals both in China and abroad. And finally, we were lucky enough to consult a renowned traditional Chinese medicine doctor in City A. The prescription from this doctor held off Bruno's life, which was almost running out of time. After 2 doses of the medicine, his difficulty breathing was significantly relieved. But the preparation for this Chinese medicine was complicated. Some herbs needed to be soaked in advance, some needed to be boiled first, others added later, and some precious materials needed to be boiled separately 3 or 4 times. Even the temperature of the medicine and the timing of taking it were crucial. I was afraid others wouldn't do it properly, so I took care of everything myself. Every day, I varied the meals I prepared to ensure he had enough nutrition to maintain his strength and immunity. I handed over the company affairs and devoted myself wholeheartedly to taking care of him at home for the past 3 years, with the only wish that he could stay by my side for a few more years. Under my care, his health gradually improved, and he was even able to follow a normal routine like any other person. Just 3 months ago, during a routine checkup, the doctor said his condition was well controlled. But in just a few short months, we received the death sentence. When the doctor said the cancer had spread throughout his body and there were many brain metastases, I was frozen. My legs gave way, and I collapsed onto the floor. But Bruno remained calm, or at least pretended to be. He helped me up and held me in his arms, suppressing his emotions. He said, "Juliet, this day was bound to come. I've lived 3 more years than the doctors initially estimated. The sword hanging over my head has finally fallen. The only regret I have is that I won't be able to grow old with you. It's my fault that you'll have to walk through this life alone." At that moment, I almost wanted to die with him. Looking back at my feelings at the time, it's not an exaggeration to say it was like 1,000 arrows piercing my heart. But I've strayed off topic. Let me get back to how I discovered that Bruno had been lying to me. Chapter 4. Bruno refused the doctor's advice to admit him to the hospital as soon as possible, saying there were many things he still needed to take care of and insisted on going home. The doctor prescribed a bunch of medication and told him that if his pain became severe, he could increase the dosage as needed. After arriving home, Bruno, with a pale face, told me he wanted to be alone for a while and went into the study. I understood his despair and helplessness, so I didn't disturb him. Instead, I silently cried and, as usual, prepared a nutritious meal for him. Yam and millet porridge mixed with vegetable puree, steamed fish, beef balls, and tofu soup. It was late when Bruno finally came out of the study. It was clear that he had cried. His eyes and nose were red, and there were traces of tears on his face. Even his voice was hoarse. I looked at him with a heart full of pain, unsure of how to comfort him. We ate dinner in silence, And then Bruno said he wanted to go for a walk. Okay, I'll go with you, I said softly. He shook his head, his tone firm. Juliet, I'm feeling very troubled. Can I have some time alone? I'll be fine, please. His voice was full of sorrow and desolation, and I couldn't bring myself to refuse. But how could I let him, in the late stages of cancer, go out on his own? I took off my apron and quietly followed him out of the door. He didn't drive. He walked slowly out of the neighborhood, through the park, and into a villa community designed in a private garden style. This community was the Rose Garden Villas, an upscale area with detached villas, much more expensive than the townhouse we lived in. The security guard at the entrance seemed to know Bruno, greeted him warmly, and then opened the gate. Naturally, I couldn't follow him into such a high-end residential area. I pointed at Bruno's back and angrily asked the security guard, "Why can he go for a walk and you let him in, but not me? Is there some sort of gender discrimination going on?" I immediately accused him without hesitation. The young security guard twitched his mouth and helplessly said, "Miss, Bruno is the owner here. If you want to buy a villa here, we would welcome you just as warmly." Bruno is the owner here? I was stunned. Chapter 5. I don't remember how I got back home. When I came to my senses, I found that I was holding a dashcam memory card and 2 miniature recorders that had been on standby for a long time. I never let myself fall into endless suspicion. That would only lead to internal exhaustion. Since I had doubts, I would verify them. I went to Bruno's car and swapped the original memory card from his dashcam, then placed the 2 mini recorders in the hidden compartments of his handbag and the lining of his suit. After thinking for a moment, I also ordered a mini wireless camera from an online store, one that could connect remotely to my phone and be delivered the next day. After doing all this, I was drenched in sweat, yet a cold chill still rose in my heart, so much so that my whole body trembled. Bruno left around 7 in the evening and returned close to midnight. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat alone on the sofa, staring blankly. When Bruno came back and turned on the lights, he was startled to see me. "Juliet, why aren't you asleep? I'm sorry to worry you. I shouldn't have come back so late. I just felt really down." "So," he apologized, then opened his arms and embraced me, gently rubbing my head with his chin, just like the past 8 years, with the same gentle manner. He smelled faintly of perfume, the same brand I used, the scent identical, but I didn't wear perfume. His condition had worsened suddenly, and he had coughed up blood all night. How could I have had the mood to do such things? Chapter 6. In reality, the truth is always more devastating than any speculations or imagination. This blow undoubtedly overturned the past 14 years of my understanding of Bruno, as well as my understanding of my in-laws. I felt like I had been living in the Truman Show for all these years. Let's start with Bruno's dashcam. The dashcam retains the footage for up to 14 days. Though some emergency situations will result in permanent storage. When I inserted the memory card into the converter and connected it to the computer, my palms were covered in sweat. I hoped that everything was just my own paranoid imagination, that it was just my suspicious mind at work. But when I saw the footage, the blood in my body froze. Every day after Bruno left the house, he would first go to the Rose Garden Villas to pick up a mother and daughter. The woman I recognized, she was Katerina, the administrative manager at Bruno's good friend's company. He had even introduced her to the job. He had said that Katerina was his former high school classmate, that she had divorced and was now raising a child on her own, and that he was helping her by making the introduction. The little girl was about 7 or 8 years old, a student at an experimental elementary school. Bruno had been taking her to school every day these past few days. The dashcam was a single-lens model, so the interior of the car was not visible while driving. But there was audio. The little girl called Bruno Daddy. The woman called Bruno Darling. She even reminded Bruno, "Remember to delete the dashcam footage in time. It would be bad if she found out." Bruno responded, "I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. She won't check this." These past few years, I've been sick. She's been running around taking care of me. And whenever I message you, I do it in front of her. She never even looks at my messages. Her focus has been entirely on my health. The traditional Chinese medicine doctor she found for me really helped. If it weren't for her, I probably wouldn't have made it this far. The little girl giggled and said, "Daddy, is she a fool? Mom always says she's a stupid woman. A cow and horse working for our family." After a few seconds of silence, Bruno smiled and replied, The little girl seemed to feel encouraged. "Last time when Mom and I went to see Grandma said that woman is stupid too. She said if it weren't for the fact that she's useful, you would have definitely had to take Mom and me home. Grandma also said that when Mom has a little brother, you should take us home." Chapter 7. How should I describe how I felt at that moment? I thought I would be angry, fall apart, go mad, or want to take a knife and kill them all. But in the end, I just bitterly smiled through my tears, then raised my hand and slapped myself hard twice. My husband had slept next to me for 8 years, yet I hadn't noticed that he had been lying to me all along. This was my fault. I was naive enough to think that true love, the kind that stands by each other through thick and thin, really existed. This, too, was my fault. And my in-laws, whom I had treated like my own parents. I gave them the opportunity to deceive me. I didn't set up any defenses against them, and that's how they were able to manipulate me. So, the one who deserved to be slapped is me. After taking this heart-wrenching first step, my mindset became much calmer. So when I saw the mini camera in the study capture Bruno opening the hidden safe, revealing golden bars, jewelry, and stacks of cash, it didn't seem as difficult to accept anymore. I had never seen these items before, and I didn't even know they existed. Therefore, I didn't think Bruno would leave these things for me. Could it be that he had been carefully hiding them from me all this time, only to suddenly reveal them to blind me with his wealth before he died? "Look, my dear wife, I've prepared this for you as a surprise before I die." I couldn't bring myself to laugh. He seemed to be struggling with how to distribute these possessions, scribbling on paper, getting increasingly frustrated, and then tearing the paper up, tossing it into the trash. I think anyone would be frustrated at a time like this, holding so much wealth in his hands, yet knowing he was about to die. How could he possibly remain at peace? I coldly watched the scene unfold before me, and hatred began to slowly fill my heart. Chapter 8. That night, Bruno slept in the study. I acted thoughtfully, not disturbing him. The next morning, as usual, he left for work, carrying a garbage bag from his study. So cautious and careful. He noticed the empty breakfast table and didn't see the usual balanced meal laid out. He couldn't help but furrow his brow slightly. But there was no questioning or reproach from him. Instead, he looked at me with concern. "Juliet, are you feeling unwell today? I've already told you that you can sleep in a little longer in the morning. You don't have to wake up at 4 or 5 every day for me. You can just grab something downstairs at the company." I rolled my eyes inwardly but didn't answer him. Instead, I turned around and went into the kitchen to bring him the Chinese medicine I had prepared. "Be careful. It's hot. If you're not feeling well, don't go to the company. We can find a reliable professional manager to run the company just as well." Bruno took the bowl of medicine, drank it in one go as usual, and handed me the empty bowl, shaking his head. "How could it be the same, while my health still allows? I need to handle the company affairs. That way, when I'm gone, I can leave it in your hands, and you won't have to worry." I lowered my gaze, hiding the sarcasm in my eyes. He picked up his briefcase at the entrance and began to change his shoes. Just as he was about to step out the door, I called out to him, "Bruno." He turned around, looking at me with some confusion. "What's wrong?" I swallowed the bitterness in my throat and forced myself to ask, "Is there something you want to tell me? Or is there something you're hiding from me?" I stared at him intently, without blinking. It felt as if the air had frozen at that moment. The hand holding the garbage bag tightened involuntarily. The hot and humid wind from outside blew through the open door into the living room, but it couldn't break the cold atmosphere between us. I gave him a chance to be honest and explain himself. If he had the courage to openly admit his wrongs and sincerely apologize, then, seeing as he was dying, maybe I would forgive him. Bruno's throat moved slightly, and he avoided my gaze, asking me in return, "Did someone tell you something? Why are you asking me this all of a sudden?" Seeing that I didn't speak, he continued, "Aside from work, I'm almost always with you. You even know how many times a day I go to the bathroom. What could I possibly be hiding from you? If you don't believe me, I can swear it. I pressed my trembling lips together and forced a smile. I haven't heard anything, but I'm afraid there's something you're holding back. I want you to know that no matter what, I'll face it with you, no matter how much time the doctor says you have left. I won't give up on you like I did 3 years ago. He paused, and slowly his eyes began to moisten. Juliet. Thank you. I'm content with having married you in this life. Don't worry. I won't give up on myself before the very last moment. I'll keep going with the treatment and stay by your side for a while longer. Looking at the man in front of me who was moved by his own words, I felt utterly disappointed. Then you should go to work. Take care of yourself. Bruno nodded and turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, my heart sank, but at the same time, it made my next actions even more determined and resolute. Without any hesitation or doubt. Chapter 9. Did you hear what we just said? A stern voice pulled me back from my memories. I looked at the police officer who was speaking to me. We understand the pain of losing your husband, and that you may have acted out of grief. But you should also understand the parents' position. They've lost their son, and you shouldn't keep provoking them. The older officer spoke to me in a kindly but serious tone. I tried to explain, officer. I didn't provoke them. I only called to inform them of their son's death. They barged into my house and hit me without any warning. As soon as I finished speaking, my mother-in-law's harsh voice rang out again. What do you mean your house? This is not your house. This is the house my son bought. And you'd better get out right now. My mother-in-law stormed down the stairs, her eyes filled with hatred as if she wanted to tear me to pieces. Normally, I was used to seeing my in-laws as quiet, honest people. So this sudden change caught me off guard. Why do they have 2 faces? I pulled out the voluntary gift agreement signed by Bruno and the notarized document. Mom, didn't Bruno tell you? A month ago, he transferred this house to me as a gift. The agreement is here. My mother-in-law reached out and tried to snatch the documents from my hands. This agreement is 100% fake. My son told us that he would leave you only the empty shell of the company and the debts. This house and all his assets were supposed to be left to us. How could he give it to you? The police officer, who had originally been sympathetic to my in-laws, suddenly changed his expression, a meaningful look in his eyes. Indeed, this house was originally meant to be left to his parents, but it was too bad for him that I had discovered his secret early on. I stepped behind the police officer again and innocently said, I'm not sure. Maybe in his heart, you and Dad aren't as important as I am. He told me that the person he loved most in his life was me. My mother-in-law lost it again. Her wailing voice was like an air raid siren, and she clawed at the police officer, trying to rush at him and tear me apart. The officer sternly stopped her. If you keep acting like this, I don't mind taking you to the station to sort this out properly. My mother-in-law sheepishly withdrew her hand. Compared to her, my father-in-law was much calmer. He glared at me with anger and then said to the officer, Officer, I suspect she killed my son. She's afraid we might find evidence, so she rushed to cremate him and destroy the body. The officer glanced at him coldly and asked, Accusing someone of murder isn't so simple. Where's your evidence? My father-in-law straightened his neck. The evidence? You can go investigate yourselves. If I find the evidence, then what do I need you police for? The officer gave him a look of disbelief. I turned and went to Bruno's study, retrieving a thick stack of medical records, death certificate, and cremation documents. My husband was diagnosed with terminal gastric cancer 3 years ago. Here's the diagnosis report. I handed the officer the reports from 3 years ago and continued. But fortunately, the medication controlled it. However, 3 months ago, his condition worsened and spread throughout his body. Last night, he suddenly started convulsing and vomiting blood at home. I immediately called an ambulance, but he passed away in the hospital after failed resuscitation efforts. I only proceeded with the cremation after receiving the hospital's 3-part death certificate. I explained briefly. The officer flipped through the medical records and asked skeptically, Given your husband's condition, shouldn't he have been hospitalized? Why was he staying at home? I couldn't help but show some sarcasm in my eyes. He refused to stay in the hospital. Both his attending physician and I advised him countless times. The officer's gaze remained scrutinizing and doubtful. I shrugged. If you don't believe me, you can investigate this hospital's oncology department. His attending doctor, Tony, can confirm this. The officer handed the documents back to me and said coldly, "You only need to explain your side of the story. As for how we investigate, that's not up to you to decide." I pursed my lips and remained silent. Chapter 10. It was over 2 hours of chaos and noise. After much persuasion from the police officers, we finally signed the mediation agreement. I handed the urn to my in-laws and told them to take their son to the so-called Peach Blossom Hill for his burial. It said that it was the place where Bruno and Katerina first had their intimate moments. I placed the urn in my father-in-law's hands. "Dad, I'm handing Bruno's ashes to you as per his wishes. I won't keep you for dinner today. You should go back early. As for the funeral, I won't attend. I'm a bit tired and want to rest properly." My tone was calm, as though I were talking about an everyday matter. The police officer who was collecting the body camera data twitched his mouth, looking at me as if I were some sort of monster. After holding the urn, my father-in-law suddenly realized that his son was truly gone. He could no longer vent his anger at me. Instead, he hugged the urn tightly, tears streaming down his face. My mother-in-law also cried hoarsely, unable to straighten her back. I crossed my arms, lazily leaning on one leg, and coldly watched the scene unfold. After my in-laws left, I slammed the door with a bang. Returning to the living room, I realized I felt utterly drained, so weak I could barely stand. I grabbed the banister and slowly made my way upstairs to the bedroom, then threw myself onto the bed. The smell of Bruno's presence still lingered, and I felt nauseous. I had to get up and move to the guest room next door. Soon, I fell into a deep sleep. In that hazy state, the events of the last 3 months repeated over and over, tearing apart my already shattered heart. I was in agony, struggling hopelessly. Chapter 11. I still remember the moment I got the real financial reports from the company. My hands and feet went numb. The disappointment cut through my heart like a sharp knife. 3 whole years, I had dedicated myself to taking care of Bruno's health, pouring all my energy and effort into it, gradually stepping back from managing the company. But during all this time, he had secretly tampered with the company's finances, creating fake debts and fake losses. The company's assets had shrunk by 70%, nearly driving it to bankruptcy. Over these years, he occasionally asked for money, claiming it was for the company's cash flow or for his medical treatment. He took millions from me, nearly emptying all the savings under my name. I never suspected him. 14 years together, through all the ups and downs, I believed we were the most trustworthy partners for each other. Besides, money is just a material possession. Bruno, a man with a terminal illness, couldn't take money with him when he died. What did he need money for? But the things that disappointed me weren't limited to this. Since his condition worsened again, he had been exceptionally busy. Apart from emptying our joint assets, he was also busy arranging Katerina and her daughter's future. He made sure to record everything with the hidden recorders. He first contacted insurance agents to set up over 20 policies for the mother and daughter, then carefully selected a range of educational resources for the little girl, prepaying the costs. He called several of his close friends, asking them to help take care of his parents and Katerina after his death, swearing that in his next life, he would work like a horse to repay them. And as for me, he said to his friends, "Juliet is very calculating and scheming. You mustn't let anything slip in front of her. After I die, you'd better cut all ties with her. You know, once she finds out about Katerina and her daughter, someone as pure-hearted and innocent as Katerina will be eaten alive by Juliet." After 14 years, he certainly understood me, because when we started the business together, I was always the more composed one, the one who could be ruthless when necessary. When negotiating business deals, I would always smile and speak gently, but I could quickly pinpoint the key issues and fight for the best interests for myself. Even when facing tricky problems, I would weigh the pros and cons and make my decisions carefully. I had grown used to hiding my thoughts, but with him, I had been completely open, offering my heart to him with no reservations. So what did I get in return? Before he died, he arranged everything for everyone, yet was so cruel to me. I guess, maybe in my past life, I dug up his family's ancestral tomb and desecrated the corpse, which is why he treated me this way. Otherwise, I just can't make sense of it. Chapter 12. After Bruno handled everything, he suddenly brought up divorce. "Juliet, Let's get a divorce. At the time, I had just walked out of the kitchen with the Chinese medicine I had prepared for him. Hearing this, the bowl in my hand fell to the floor. I looked at him in shock and confusion. Bruno stared at the spilled medicine on the ground, momentarily stunned. His eyes reddened. Juliet, I'd rather you be divorced than a widow. I can't bear the thought of people saying behind your back that you're a widow. He pulled me into his arms, his hot tears falling onto my shoulder, making me feel an intense discomfort, like needles pricking my skin. He choked out, "After I die, I can let go of everything, except you. These years, you've been by my side through thick and thin without any complaints. Every difficult moment, you were there with me. Fortunately, we don't have children. Find someone who loves you to be with you after I'm gone." I corrected him. "We did have a child, but you accidentally knocked over the oil bottle in the kitchen and didn't tell me. When I went into the kitchen and slipped, I miscarried. The baby was 7 months old, and I can no longer have children." Bruno's body stiffened, and his grip on me tightened. "I'm sorry." I was flustered and forgot at the time. I can still clearly remember the scene. Bruno, holding me, soaked in blood, rushed madly to the hospital. When he heard that the child couldn't be saved, and that I had lost so much blood due to placental abruption that it would be difficult for me to conceive again, he knelt on the ground in agony, repeatedly slapping his face. His tears and snot mixed together, and he cried with such pain, such regret. "After the divorce, I'll give you all of my assets, but I'd like to leave this house to my parents. Is that okay? I don't want you to live alone in this empty house." Constantly reminded of the past, I have to admit, he considered everything for me, even my emotions after his death. If he hadn't transferred his assets, if he hadn't left me with a company already on the brink of bankruptcy, but I was never going to let him have his way. Chapter 13. I disagreed with the divorce. Not only that, but 2 days later, I brought in a professional auditing team to the company to help me verify the financial anomalies over the past few years. Bruno panicked. His face turned pale as he questioned me. "Juliet, what is this about? Why is there an audit of our company all of a sudden? Do you suspect I've been falsifying the finances?" I gently reassured him. "What are you thinking? Why would I suspect you? After you die, I plan to hand the company over to a professional manager. I'm just preparing for that now, so that when you're gone, the company won't be a complete mess. A decent manager won't want to take over if the company is in chaos. I don't want you to die knowing everything is falling apart." Bruno looked at me with a complex expression, as though he was struggling to accept the word death coming from my lips. I wondered if he sensed something unusual about me. Lately, he had been more cautious around me. It was because I hadn't left his side for a moment. Even when he woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, I practically wanted to stand there holding the light. Of course, I wasn't worried about him. I was worried he might take the gold bars and jewelry from the study while I wasn't there. He had been too confident before, treating me like a fool. Now that I had found out, I wasn't going to let him take a single penny. Bruno's emotions grew more and more agitated, and he often snapped at me, but I just pretended to understand, as if his anger was caused by the pain he was enduring. Every day, I diligently got up in the middle of the night to prepare his medicine. "What medicine, you ask?" I won't go into detail, but it was just tonics, nothing that could kill him. 2 weeks later, Bruno's emotions finally exploded. He raged and smashed a lot of things in the house, screaming hysterically that he wanted a divorce. He said it was his last wish before he died. And why couldn't I fulfill it? I remained silent. Yes, I loved him so much. How could I not fulfill his last wish before he died? I wiped my tears and said, "I can agree to a divorce, but I don't want anything else. I must have this house." Bruno clenched his teeth and didn't speak. I continued crying. "I'll never leave this place. If necessary, I'll live here with my parents. You won't be able to force me out." His eyes were filled with struggle. After thinking for a moment, it seemed like he made a big decision. "I was just worried you'd get emotionally attached to the house. Since you insist on having it, then take it. I'll make arrangements with my parents." I immediately called a lawyer, asking him to prepare the gift agreement, record a video, and have it notarized. Bruno furrowed his brows, watching me. "Is it necessary to get a lawyer? When we divorce, I can just divide the house to you. Why go through all this trouble? I shook my head with tears in my eyes. This house is my only obsession. I won't allow any change to it. Although Bruno was extremely unwilling, he reluctantly agreed in order to get rid of me as quickly as possible. It was just a house. After all, compared to the vast amount of wealth he had already moved, this house wasn't even worth mentioning. The next morning, I drove him to the real estate registration center to complete the transfer procedures, and 2 days before he died, I had just received the new property deed. Chapter 14. The divorce agreement was simple. Bruno left with nothing. All the assets went to me, and the company was transferred to me. However, as far as I know, aside from the house, which wasn't a negative asset, everything else was a trap, including the 3-year-old Audi A8, which was mortgaged for a loan. When a man becomes ruthless, he's really terrifying. On the day we finalized the divorce agreement, we went straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau to schedule the divorce. When we received the acceptance receipt, Bruno's eyes suddenly turned red. He stared at me for a long time. Then, with guilt, he said, "Juliet, I'm sorry." Crocodile tears. I almost spat in his face. At that moment, his phone rang, and I glanced at it. The caller ID was Katerina. Bruno turned off his phone, then excused himself to go to the restroom and asked me to wait for him. I pretended not to notice and sat down in a chair in the hall. I messaged my cousin, "Bro, when are you coming back to the country? I'm afraid I won't be able to wait much longer." My cousin replied, "I have 20 days of vacation after my project finishes. You can wait for me for up to 3 weeks. I replied urgently, "I can wait. But those gold bars can't. Hurry up. Get it done. I'll split it with you half and half." My cousin's voice message came through directly. "Juliet, you must wait for me. The fastest will be 2 weeks. No, the fastest will be 10 days. I'll be back right away. Don't let anyone else handle this deal." My cousin graduated from a world-renowned university with a degree in computer science. Having him help me crack Bruno's safe was a bit of overkill. But at the time, I couldn't think of anyone else I could trust. Actually, the assets Bruno hid were joint marital property. Even if I openly took them back, it wouldn't be a big deal. But since he liked playing his secret games, I had to play along. When he sees the safe completely emptied, the expression on his face will surely be priceless. Chapter 15. I guess the Chinese medicine I had been making for him was really nourishing, because Bruno's health seemed to improve day by day, and his spirits were much better. The medicine included some painkillers I had added, which also alleviated his physical pain. This gave him a false sense of hope, making him think he might be lucky again, like 3 years ago. He might even live for another 3 years, he thought. During this time, he started going out more often. First, the auditor I hired was checking the company's accounts every day, so he had to go to the office to keep an eye on things. Second, he needed to spend time with Katerina and her daughter. He would either take them shopping in the next city or to an amusement park. A few times, while the little girl was at school, he even tried to make a second child with Katerina. Sometimes in the living room, sometimes in the car, sometimes outdoors. I was speechless. Even with his health like that, unable to last much longer, he still hadn't forgotten to try and leave an heir. I didn't understand, but I wished them well. 2 weeks later, my cousin finally returned to the country, after Bruno once again opened the safe to put in a few stacks of cash. I guess he probably wouldn't open it again anytime soon. That night, while he was out, I immediately contacted my cousin. In less than half an hour, my cousin had cracked open the so-called B3 level safe. My cousin and I emptied the safe in 2 trips. I counted, there were more than 200 pieces of 100G gold bars, several dozen 500G gold bars, dozens of stacks of cash worth 10,000 each, and some jade, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and other jewelry purchased at auctions. Altogether, it was worth tens of millions. These should be the funds he had siphoned off from the company over the years. Damn, his greed was truly ruthless. Chapter 16. 1 week later, I took the information the auditors provided me and anonymously reported the company's financial fraud and tax evasion to the tax authorities and the Industrial and Commercial Bureau. Additionally, I entrusted a lawyer to help me collect evidence and file a lawsuit. My demands were to confirm that the abnormal deaths were fraudulent and to recover all my losses, as well as hold the responsible individuals legally accountable. It was the perfect opportunity to root out the spies Bruno had planted in the company. After the tax and business investigations, Bruno became a nervous wreck. He quickly deteriorated. I knew he suspected me, especially since I had hired a third-party auditor and the company had been reported immediately after. But would I admit it? He no longer had the mood to go out and meet Katerina. He spent almost 16 hours a day at the company. Maybe he was trying to salvage the situation. When it came time to pick up the divorce certificate, it seemed he had already forgotten about it. I called to remind him, "Our cooling-off period is over. Should we go pick up the divorce certificate tomorrow?" Bruno stayed silent on the other end for a long time. Then, gritting his teeth, he responded with a single word, "Pick up." I pulled at the corner of my lips and smiled. He came home early that day, immediately locking himself in the study. Minutes later, the sound of what seemed like a pig being slaughtered came from inside. I stayed still, continuing to scroll through videos on my phone. After all, the door was locked, and I couldn't get in. Soon, the study door opened. Bruno, pale as a ghost and trembling all over, staggered out. He kept making muffled ugh sounds from his throat. "Call the police. Call the police right now. Who stole my safe? I'll cut them into 1,000 pieces." Oh, he finally realized his safe had been emptied. Chapter 17. I coldly watched Bruno, then slowly walked into his study and surveyed the room. Everything on the desk had been swept onto the floor. His phone was lying next to the chair, and the safe had been opened, now empty. I picked up the phone from the floor and quietly slipped it into my pocket. I asked, "How come there's a safe here? What did you keep in it?" Bruno was momentarily speechless, stammering for a long time. It's important company documents." I couldn't hold it in and let out a chuckle. What documents could be so important to make you panic like this? I thought it was gold bars. Bruno stared at me blankly, suddenly as if he realized something, his eyes nearly shooting fire. I wiped the smile off my face and became as cold as ice. I walked over to the bookshelf and stopped in front of him. I took down a small camera hidden in the ears of a large panda head on the second shelf. His face instantly froze, his eyes wide with terror, and his breathing grew heavier, like a bellows being worked. "This camera has been here for 3 months. Didn't you notice?" "Fool." I smiled, but it probably looked like the grin of a demon, because Bruno's expression was that of someone who had seen a ghost. "You bitch. You dare to spy on me? I'm calling the police right now." He shakily reached into his pocket, fumbling for something, but couldn't find what he was looking for. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and shook it at him. "Looking for this?" His eyes burned with fury as he lunged at me to grab it. I dodged easily. He lost his balance and crashed forward, falling to the ground. After a violent coughing fit, blood poured from his mouth. It seemed he couldn't catch his breath, and his hands clutched his chest in apparent pain. "Juliet, call an ambulance. It hurts so much. I can't breathe." I looked down at him, expressionless. No matter how Bruno begged, I no longer responded. I calmly started to pick up the scattered items around the room, putting everything back in place. Bruno tried several times to get up, but I kept pressing him back down with my foot, which was still wearing a cotton sock, on his shoulder. Then I leisurely went through the pile of documents, our IDs, household registration book, marriage certificate, will, and divorce agreement, whether they were useful or not. I took everything. Once I was done, I casually sat in his usual chair, casting a sideways glance at the man on the floor, who was struggling to breathe. When his struggles grew weaker, I finally made the call for an ambulance. 40 minutes later, after he was rushed into the emergency room, the doctor issued a critical condition notice and asked me to prepare myself mentally. I was ready, so I chose to withdraw treatment and calmly signed the form consenting to the cessation of treatment. Chapter 18. After halting treatment, I went in to see Bruno. It was my final gesture of care before his death. He was wearing an oxygen mask. When he saw me approach, his eyes widened with fury, as if he wanted to stab me to death. But he could no longer speak, only leaving foggy patches on the oxygen mask. I leaned down, whispering in his ear, What a pity. I won't be able to send you to prison. Bruno's pupils shrank instantly, and his face turned pale with fear. I smiled, continuing. I took all the money from the safe. Don't worry. I'll leave the retirement funds for your parents. But as for the villa, the car, and everything you gave to your little lover, I'm going to take it all back. I gently stroked his hair, just like when we were in love. Let me guess. Have you done a paternity test with that little girl? I guess not. Since you both look so much alike. I pretended to think for a moment before chuckling. By the way, I guess Katerina is pregnant again, so no paternity test. Huh? Bruno raised his hand in terror to rip off his oxygen mask, but I pressed his hand down. So, how are you going to prove they're your blood? If they're not your blood, how can they inherit your fortune from me? My voice was soft, but each word was crystal clear. I lightly patted his hand and added, by the way, didn't you tell your friends I'm calculating and crafty? I guess I can't disappoint their view of me. Unfortunately, you won't get to see the wonderful scenes of me dealing with your lover and friends. Don't worry. I'll live on well. You can rest in peace. Bruno took his last breath in front of me. After he died, his eyes were wide open. I guess this is what they mean by dying with regrets. I thought back to a month ago when we drafted the divorce agreement, and Bruno had even pretended to write a will. The will was simple, since he had left all his assets to me in the divorce agreement and was walking away with nothing. The will only arranged for his afterlife. He told me to give his ashes to his parents, saying he wanted his soul to return to his hometown. It was just a smokescreen, a charade. After all, once we divorced, I, as his ex-wife, wouldn't be able to take his body for cremation. The paperwork wouldn't pass. But no matter how much he planned, he hadn't accounted for the fact that he would die before the divorce was even finalized. He told me that Peach Blossom Hill was where he grew up, and every spring, the peach blossoms would bloom. He wanted to be buried there. Of course, I couldn't grant his wish. So, after the cremation at the funeral home, I threw his ashes away halfway. What his parents took home was just a pile of fake ashes made of plaster. It took me over half a month of preparation, even finding images of ashes online to make a convincing replica, in case his parents got suspicious. Chapter 19. Bruno's funeral wasn't even over before I filed a lawsuit against Katerina, demanding she return all the property Bruno had given her during our marriage. Katerina was stunned. On the day of the trial, my in-laws came. My father-in-law sat in the witness stand. Katerina was nearly in tears. My daughter is Bruno's daughter. She should inherit her father's wealth. The judge asked for evidence. Everything here must be proven. It's not just your word. I have proof. I have a paternity test report. To my surprise, Katerina actually produced a paternity test report. I felt as if I'd been hit in the head with a hammer. My hands clenched into fists, nerves tightening. After looking at the report, the judge frowned. This evidence is invalid. It's a one-sided paternity test, and it cannot confirm whether the sample came from Bruno himself. I secretly sighed in relief. Katerina tried to argue. Even though it was one-sided, the report shows a 99.9% probability of biological father-daughter relation. The judge pressed on. Then how do you prove the father's sample came from Bruno? Katerina was caught off guard. In a panic, she pointed to my in-laws in the witness stand. Bruno's parents can confirm they were both there when I gave birth, and his mother even took care of me during my confinement. Ridiculous! The judge's expression became serious. None of that proves anything. Do you have other evidence to provide? My mother-in-law stood up urgently. How else do you need proof? This child looks exactly like Bruno did when he was young. What more do you need? Are you really saying this isn't his? I think you've been bribed by Juliet. That wicked woman. You must have taken her money to make things hard for us. All you people care about is money. My father-in-law immediately lunged to cover my mother-in-law's mouth. But the judge wasn't fooled and immediately called the court security to have them removed from the courtroom. Chapter 20. For the past 6 months, I've been running back and forth between the courts. On one hand, I was trying to recover the losses of the company, suing Bruno's shady friends who colluded with him to create false debts and launder money. On the other hand, I had to keep battling Katerina in court. For the former, I had sufficient evidence, and the hearings went smoothly on both occasions. But as for Katerina, She was stubbornly refusing to return the assets Bruno had given her. By this time, the child she was carrying was almost due. Bruno died before becoming a father. In the end, the court had to enforce the ruling. The day they took back the villa and the car, Katerina, clutching her belly, was crying hysterically. She shouted, "How can you be so vicious? My 2 children are also Bruno's. Why can't you just treat them well? No wonder you couldn't have children. This is your retribution." She continued to curse me with the most venomous words as I walked past her. I didn't even glance at her, walking straight to the car. If my retribution for blindly loving the wrong person was losing my child, then her retribution would be me, for the rest of her life. I hope she'll crawl in the darkness like a maggot in the gutter, because people like her never deserve to see the light. Once I got in the car, the driver started the engine. Through the moving car window, I watched the hustle and bustle of traffic retreat and slowly fade into the distance. I knew that the 14 years of love, hate, and entanglements had come to an end here. Bruno's side story. Chapter 1. Falling in love with Juliet was an accident. I first met her during the winter of my freshman year. The campus had just been covered with a thick blanket of snow, creating a dreamy, magical scene. I was on my way to a club meeting when I saw Juliet, wearing a soft pink down jacket, struggling to carry a thick stack of club flyers. Her pale face had a rosy tint from the effort, and tiny beads of sweat formed on the tip of her nose. When she saw me, she gave me an awkward smile, showing her white teeth. "Excuse me, could you help me carry some of these to the activity room? They're a bit too heavy." How should I describe her smile? It was like a tree blooming under the warmth of the winter sun. I shouldn't have fallen for her. I already had a girlfriend, Katerina, though we didn't go to the same university. But on the night after the college entrance exams, we had already given ourselves to each other, crossing the line of intimacy. I couldn't let down the girl who only had eyes for me. But still, I really wanted to get to know the girl in front of me. I took most of the flyers from her hands. "Hello, I'm Bruno." She smiled at me with gratitude, gently replying, "Hello, Bruno, I'm Juliet." Chapter 2. I fell in love with Juliet. I really did. I told myself, Katerina's university is nearly 1,000 kilometers away, so even if I'm with Juliet, she won't find out. But I was still struggling. After all, Katerina was my first love. It was hard for me to let go. Then, out of the blue, Katerina sent me a message to break up. She told me that she had fallen for a senior in their university, and they had already started dating during Christmas. She didn't want to lie to me or cheat on him. To be honest, I was relieved when Katerina broke up with me. It took away some of the guilt, but my pride as a man still made it difficult to fully overcome that emotional hurdle. Which is why, after we got married, when she came to find me to catch up, I somehow didn't push her away. I chased after Juliet for a year, from the winter of my freshman year to the winter of my sophomore year. She finally agreed. At that time, my only thought was to cherish her. She was so good that she insisted on splitting expenses during our dating to respect my pride, secretly added money to my meal card, helped me shop for clothes for all 4 seasons without me asking, and didn't care about my modest background when she unconditionally married me. She was with me through the hardships of starting our business, and even the initial funding for our company came from her father, who lent us $3 million. But I still let her down. Chapter 3. Katerina appeared in my life about 6 months after I married Juliet. At that time, she had just divorced that man. I heard he had abused her and cheated on her. She didn't want to go back to her hometown and face her relatives, so she came to a city to find me. That night, we drank a lot together. She cried, hugging me, saying that I was all she had left, that she was sorry for breaking up with me when we first went to college. I pushed her away and coldly said, "I'm already married, and I love my wife very much." Katerina, with tears in her eyes, responded, "I don't care who you marry. As long as there's a small place in your heart for me, I'll be content. I don't mind being your mistress." She began reminiscing about that night after the college entrance exams, when we were together in the soft grass of Peach Blossom Hill, then leaned in to kiss me. I wanted to push her away again. But suddenly, memories of her innocence and shyness from that time surfaced in my mind. I lost control and pulled her tightly into my embrace. 2 months later, Katerina messaged me to say she was pregnant. She wanted me to buy her a house, and she promised to raise the child on her own without disturbing my life with Juliet. But she was carrying my child. How could I let her and the baby suffer? At that time, our business was just starting, and the company wasn't making much money. To avoid making Juliet suspicious, I didn't dare touch any of the assets under my name. Instead, I discussed with my parents and transferred the house and the county town to Katerina. Katerina and I had known each other for many years. My parents were aware of our early relationship and had always supported us being together. Later, when they saw that Juliet's family was well off and could help me, they reluctantly accepted Juliet on the surface. I understood my parents' mentality, but to avoid escalating tensions between my mother and Juliet, and because my parents were willing to play the humble role to please Juliet, I didn't say anything about it. Everyone has their desires in life, don't they? When my mother found out that Katerina was pregnant with my child, she was thrilled. Not only did she not blame me, but she immediately transferred the county house to Katerina. She said that Katerina was her golden grandchild, and she would never let her suffer. They didn't only have that one house either. After we got married, Juliet bought my parents a 3-bedroom apartment in a city, since they were planning to move there. Chapter 4. Looking back on these events, I always feel embarrassed. My chest tightens, and I feel like I can't face the 2 women who truly loved me. But I still feel like I owe Katerina more. I gave my love to Juliet, and I was by her side, including giving her the title of wife. So, I always wanted to make up for Katerina in terms of money. As the company started to do better and I had more money in my hands, Juliet still never asked about how my money was being distributed. She truly gave me 100% trust. I started buying Katerina expensive clothes and jewelry, and I would send her a generous allowance every month. I also thought of many excuses in case Juliet suddenly checked the accounts. For example, I could say these things were gifts for a client's lover. She wouldn't really go and confront the client, would she? But I overestimated her. Juliet almost never checked my personal accounts. She rarely touched the money in our joint account. She mostly spent from her own. This only made me more reckless. Using my parents' name, I bought a detached villa in the Rose Garden Villas, about 3 kilometers from our neighborhood. Since our daughter was going to kindergarten, I couldn't let her attend school in the small county town. I also introduced Katerina to my friend's company, where she got a job as an administrative manager with a monthly salary of $50,000. I then gave my friend $40,000 to cover the difference. Chapter 5. Juliet got pregnant in the 3rd year of our marriage. It was also the year before I was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. We were both ecstatic, and our parents were equally happy, but I never expected Katerina to come to my house with her daughter. I was terrified. She had never acted so recklessly before. Katerina, crying in front of me, asked if after Juliet's baby was born, I would abandon her and her daughter. She said my mother had been talking to her, saying how great it would be if Juliet had a son. That way, the Bruno family would have an heir, and my company would have a successor. I desperately tried to calm her down, hoping she would leave as soon as possible, completely unaware that her daughter had sneaked into the kitchen. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just a curious child exploring the house. It wasn't until later that night when Juliet went to the kitchen to get water and accidentally slipped that I discovered the floor was covered in oil. I froze in shock, only then realizing that Katerina had likely encouraged her daughter to do this. But the child was only 4 years old. She was still just a kid and didn't understand the consequences of her actions. I couldn't let Juliet find out about them, or our marriage would be over. In the end, I had no choice but to take the blame for it. Chapter 6. We couldn't save the baby. The doctor said it was a boy. What was even harder for me to accept was that Juliet might never be able to have children again. I knelt in front of Juliet, slapping myself repeatedly. At that moment, I had no right to ask for her forgiveness. I could only punish myself. Perhaps this was punishment from heaven. On the exact day the baby was supposed to be born, I was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. It felt like the sky was collapsing. Juliet, who had been angry and distant from me, cried with swollen eyes when she found out about my illness. She no longer brought up the issue of the baby. Instead, she focused on contacting hospitals both domestic and international, taking me everywhere for treatment. In the end, her father's old war buddy introduced us to a famous traditional Chinese medicine doctor in Beijing. The doctor had stopped seeing patients, but Juliet's father and his old friend pleaded with him. And in the end, the doctor agreed to treat me, seeing their sincerity and remembering their past achievements. At first, I went with the mindset of trying anything, considering my cancer was already in the advanced stage. But remarkably, my condition began to stabilize. But Juliet suffered. She had to get up at 4 or 5 in the morning to prepare medicine for me and constantly came up with new ways to make nutritious meals for me. There were many times when I thought, if only I could stop now. I wanted to confess my shameful actions and beg her forgiveness, kneeling before her, but I kept making the same mistakes. Perhaps my illness had changed my mindset. Every time I saw Katerina's daughter, I felt deeply guilty toward her. I began to spend as much time with her as possible, even driving her to and from school often. Maybe when she grows up and thinks of her father, she'll remember these moments of me loving her. Katerina was different from Juliet. She was fragile, lacked direction, and her parents favored her brother over her. If she returned to her family's house, her mother and brother would definitely not accept her. I had to plan for them. So, I started withdrawing funds from the company and gradually turned my savings into gold bars and cash. I wanted to leave everything for my parents and Katerina and her daughter after I passed. As for Juliet, she came from a wealthy family, with loving parents who cared for her. Even if I didn't do anything for her, she would still have a good life. It was my own fault for making things so final. I took advantage of Juliet's love and trust and trampled all over her. So, in the end, I understood her retaliation. She had always been decisive, and even with how she treated me, she had shown restraint. But I couldn't stop thinking about Katerina and her daughter, especially since she might be carrying my second child. Sigh. If I could do it all over again, I would. Chapter 7. 3 years after my death, my soul still lingers in this world. I watched as Katerina returned to the small county town with my parents. I watched as she left her 2 children with them, and later married a divorced older man. I watched as Juliet also met someone new. Eventually, she married him. He was taller and more handsome than I had ever been. His parents seemed well educated, speaking gently and treating Juliet with genuine sincerity. Juliet had become more beautiful, even a little chubbier, no longer having to care for me, the sickly one. She became even more radiant. The man held her hand tightly, looking very nervous. Following his gaze, I noticed that Juliet's belly was slightly rounded. She was pregnant? Juliet looked at the man with soft, loving eyes. I told you, I can go for the checkup by myself. You go handle your work. Don't worry about me. How can I? Nothing is more important than you. She had used that same look on me once, but when I died, the look in her eyes when she glanced at me was filled with hatred and disgust. I thought that even if she hated me, it was still a good thing. At least she hadn't completely let go of me. But she quickly moved on, living sincerely and passionately. She didn't let my deceit make her distrust everyone else. She still dared to love and be loved. She was truly amazing. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and my eyes burned, but my soul had no tears. As long as she was happy, that was enough for me. As for me, I could only remain a lonely spirit in this world, never to be reborn. Story 2. On my way out to pick a birthday gift for Diego, I unexpectedly went into early labor and gave birth to a baby boy. While waiting for him to arrive, I happened to scroll through his childhood sweetheart's social media post. Finally delivered a big, healthy boy. The dad is overjoyed. The picture showed a happy family of 3. Meanwhile, I was barely clinging to life. He hadn't even attended a single prenatal checkup with me, yet he could accompany someone else through childbirth. Without a word, I left behind the divorce papers and moved out of the city. He, however, frantically searched for me. Selena, what makes you think you can just file for divorce like this? I looked at him indifferently, my face expressionless. I'm making space for you too, you should be happy. He froze, his expression faltering, hugging me tightly. His voice trembled as he said, "Didn't you say we'd grow old together?" Chapter 1. After giving birth, I lay weakly on the hospital bed, listening to my mother nag. Diego is something else. You've just had a baby, and he's nowhere to be seen. Look at other families. What kind of pregnant woman has to go through this alone? Mom's eyebrows were practically shooting upward with anger. But I defended Diego. Mom, Diego just got promoted. The company must have a ton of things keeping him busy. For the sake of our little family, Diego often had to attend social events. Always busy and on the go. He cared about me, so I had to support him in return. Mom paused mid-slice with the apple in her hand and said something that caught me off guard. Aren't you afraid he might be seeing another woman? I chuckled. Mom, I trust him. When we first started dating, Diego was always considerate of my feelings. Handsome and charismatic. He had plenty of women chasing after him. But to put me at ease, he made my picture his social media cover photo. If anyone ever gave me trouble, he was the first to step in and protect me. He once told me, as long as I'm around, no one will dare bully you. I still remember how cold the wind felt on my face that day. He held me tightly in his arms, and my heart burned with warmth. We got married right after graduating college, and we were happy. When I got pregnant, he became busier with work. I understood, but just after reassuring Mom, I saw something on my social media feed. Diego's childhood sweetheart, Julia, had posted a photo with the caption, "Finally delivered a big, healthy boy." The dad is overjoyed. In the picture, Diego was holding a baby carefully in his arms, his face radiating happiness. I set my phone down and glanced around the empty room. My son, born prematurely, was still in the incubator, fighting for his life. Tears rolled down my cheeks, large and uncontrollable, leaving Mom speechless. She hurriedly wiped my tears, panicking as she asked what was wrong. I forced a small smile and said softly, "Mom, can you do me a favor? I want a divorce." I kept looking at that photo over and over, searching for some kind of clue. A part of me absurdly hoped there was some explanation, that this was all a misunderstanding. But then I saw Diego's wedding ring lying carelessly to the side, his face brimming with joy. I remembered what he'd said during our wedding. "Selena, this ring represents the most beautiful moment of our lives. Unless my finger is severed, I will never take it off." I was so moved then, intertwining my fingers with his and holding him tightly in my arms. I knew Julia liked Diego, but Diego assured me sincerely, "Julia is like a sister to me. I have no romantic feelings for her." He swore, "If I ever like Julia, may I be struck by lightning." Worried, I quickly covered his mouth, telling him to take back the vow out of concern for him. When I got pregnant, I started experiencing relentless bouts of morning sickness day and night. He wanted to quit his job to stay at home with me, gently holding my face and saying, "I promised I wouldn't let you suffer. Please, let me take care of you." I was moved to tears, my heart swelling with warmth as I nestled into his arms. Of course, I didn't let him quit. Every day, I urged him to go to work, suppressing my discomfort as I watched him leave. When I started feeling a bit better, Julia came over. She brought a pile of gift boxes, big and small, with Diego following behind her. Standing on the balcony, I looked down and saw their intimate interaction. I reminded myself not to overthink it. After all, no one knew how good Diego was to me better than I did. They came into the house one after the other. The moment Julia saw me, she covered her mouth. "Selena, what happened to you?" I glanced down at my big belly and instinctively touched the acne scars on my face. Then, I looked at her flawless makeup and slim figure, and an unspoken sadness crept into my heart. She continued, seemingly oblivious, "Childbirth really takes such a toll on women. I swear, unless it's true love, I'll never go through this." After saying that, she covered her mouth and started dry heaving, heading straight for the bathroom. Diego quickly followed her, walking briskly and asking, "Are you feeling unwell? Do you need me to take you to the hospital?" Her eyes carried a hint of shyness, but at the time, I was still foolishly unaware of what was happening. When Julia left, she covered her face with a playful laugh and said, "Selena, you're so lucky to have a husband like Diego. You must wake up smiling in your sleep." I didn't like the way she spoke and didn't respond. After Diego walked her out, He glanced at me, said nothing, and went straight to the bedroom. I was left sitting on the couch, unsure of what to do. When Diego arrived at the hospital, it had already been 24 hours since I gave birth. My mom stayed by my side, too afraid to sleep in case I called out in pain. I hung my head, tears falling uncontrollably like a broken string of pearls. Diego hurried in with a bouquet of flowers, came close, and held my hand. "Selena, you've worked so hard. You're the hero of our family." Silently, I pulled my hand away. Suddenly, without warning, I sneezed. Immediately after, a suffocating sensation overwhelmed me. I gasped for air, my face swelling and turning red and purple from the strain. My mom jumped up and ran out of the room to call the doctor, while Diego stood there frozen, staring blankly as I struggled in agony. I held on to the last shred of consciousness, reaching out toward him, but my hand grasped nothing but air. Leaning back against the bed, I managed to utter a weak question. "Diego, I'm allergic to pollen. Did you forget?" He froze, guilt and helplessness washing over his face. I had just given birth, my body already fragile, and now I had barely survived this ordeal. Outside, Diego leaned against the wall, chain-smoking with an air of frustration, his fingers constantly scrolling through his phone. When I was moved back to a regular hospital room, it seemed he finally remembered the baby. "Selena, where's the baby? Does he look like us?" I raised my head, locking eyes with him. "Didn't you just see him? Or should I say, I saw him for you. He does look like you, just like you too." He froze for a moment, then returned to his usual demeanor. "So, you know, that baby was just an accident. Julia told me she'd never marry anyone in her life. She just wanted a child to keep her company. Since her parents passed away early, it's a request I couldn't refuse. So you slept with her, and now we both ended up pregnant at the same time?" My voice trembled as I forced the words out, my neck stiff with anger. Diego abruptly stood up, his voice raising a few notches in irritation. "What do you mean, slept with her? With modern technology, it was just artificial insemination. Why are you being so unreasonable?" Even now, he clung to the excuse of technology to deceive me. His angry voice reverberated in my chest, making it ache. I let out a bitter laugh, then spoke softly. "Diego, let's get a divorce." Diego flatly and firmly rejected me. "No, absolutely not. I won't agree. If this is about the child, I'll have Julia explain everything to you." I looked at him with a mix of emotions, struggling to understand him. If he could have a child with another woman today, he could build a life with her tomorrow. This kind of marriage was something I couldn't bear for another moment. Diego, determined to stop me from overthinking, even made an effort to spend time with me, leaving me momentarily dazed, as if we'd gone back to how things used to be. But every night, without fail, he would quietly leave, disgusted. I followed him one night and overheard his phone conversation with Julia. "How's the baby? Is he still spitting up milk? I can't leave right now. Please ask Mom to help out more." Julia's playful yet considerate voice came through the line. "It's okay. I'll take good care of myself and our baby. You should spend more time with your wife." Diego sighed in relief before replying in a softer tone. "If only she were half as understanding as you." "I can't stop worrying. I'll come see you soon." He ended the call and left without hesitation, not even glancing back. Leaning against the wall, I slowly slid down, a mournful whimper escaping my throat. When did I become a burden in his eyes? Someone unreasonable and difficult? He worried about Julia's baby spitting up milk but didn't spare a thought for our son, who was still lying in the incubator. I wrapped myself in a sweater and walked to the room where my son was. Through the glass, I could see how much he was struggling. His tiny body heaved with each breath, smaller and frilier than other babies his age. The doctor said that if he couldn't pass this critical period, he might not survive. Covering my mouth, I leaned against the glass, speaking softly to myself. "I'm sorry. This is all my fault. I made you suffer." Feeling overwhelmed, I forced myself back to the hospital room, barely holding it together. Once my postpartum confinement period ended, I wasted no time returning home to pack my things and leave. By coincidence, Julia gave birth the same day I did. and our confinement periods also ended on the same day. Naturally, Diego didn't have time for me. He called early in the morning to explain. Selena, Julia has no one to help her, and she's really overwhelmed. Her baby is still in the hospital. Mom will help you with your discharge, okay? Before he could finish, I hung up the phone with a blank expression. My mom, heartbroken, held my hand, trying to comfort me and give me strength. I shook my head, gripping her hand in return, and said firmly, Mom, you should go home. I have some things to deal with, but I'll come back afterward. She nodded, reluctant but understanding, and left. Feeling utterly disheartened, I returned home. Pushing the door open, I found Diego there as well. Julia was sitting on the sofa, nursing her baby, while Diego and my mother-in-law chatted happily, and I was just the extra piece in the room, letting out a cold laugh. I said nothing and went upstairs to my room. I pulled out my suitcase and packed only a few valuables and some clothes before heading back down. Diego looked at me in surprise, his eyes fixed on my suitcase. Where are you going? He asked, confused. Before I could answer, my mother-in-law interjected, her tone full of disdain. Why bother asking? Can't you see she's moving out? Perfect. Julia and my grandson can move in, and we can all live together happily. She shot me a scornful glare before taking the baby from Julia and doting on him. Julia walked over to me softly, and without warning, knelt down. Her sudden action startled everyone. Sister-in-law, it's all my fault. I'm getting older and just really wanted a child to keep me company. I never intended to come between you and Diego. If you feel I've done something wrong, I'll kneel and apologize to you. As she spoke, she began to lower her head, shocked. I backed away several steps. My back slammed into the cabinet, and pain shot through me, forcing me to bend over. It took a long time before I could straighten up. Diego strode forward, scooping Julia up and placing her back on the sofa. With a serious tone, he said, Julia has done nothing wrong. If anyone is to blame, it's me, Selena. We've been together for so many years. Can't you be a little more forgiving for once? Do you really want to push Julia to the brink just to feel satisfied? I held onto my aching back, slowly raised my head, and let out a bitter laugh. Forgiving? What exactly do you want me to forgive? Diego? Share a husband with another woman? I can't do that. If you insist on thinking I'm the unreasonable one, then just sign the divorce papers already. Soon you'll be able to live happily ever after with your wife and child, just like your mother always dreamed of. I threw the divorce agreement in his face and stormed out. I feared that in the next moment, my pathetic tears would start falling uncontrollably. After leaving, I arranged for my son to be transferred to a different hospital and left this painful place behind. Diego sent me messages filled with the same words over and over, insisting that divorce was out of the question. After a while, they no longer meant anything to me. Once my son was transferred, I started splitting my time between home and the hospital. Over time, I became familiar with the doctors there. By coincidence, the pediatrician, Dr. Luis, turned out to be a high school classmate of mine. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, but he recognized me first. Are you married? He asked out of nowhere, an absurd question. I pointed to the tiny figure in the room behind the glass. That's my son. He scratched his head awkwardly and apologized several times. Luis was a pediatrician and also my son's primary doctor. Since there were many things regarding my son that required Luis's help, I decided to treat him to dinner as a gesture of gratitude. Just as we sat down at the restaurant, I spotted someone I didn't want to see. Diego and Julia were seated by the window. The baby in the stroller was kicking its tiny feet, drawing smiles and admiration from passers-by. I turned my head away and led Luis to a table in the corner, my chest burning with anger. Julia, when did you have a baby? Is this your husband? Why didn't you introduce him to us? Exactly. The little one is so adorable. Julia, you're really something. You didn't even tell us about your wedding. Be sure to let us know when you have a 1-month celebration for the baby. These must have been Julia's friends. They hadn't noticed Diego yet and were making small talk. When Diego finally appeared, the room fell into an awkward silence. One person, however, spotted me in the corner and loudly called out, "Selena, you're here too. Who's this with you?" I replied calmly, "My son's primary doctor, Luis." Their expressions turned awkward as they collectively gasped. Julia, visibly uneasy, pushed the stroller toward us and spoke with concern. "The baby, is he very sick?" I never understood the hardship of being a mother before, but now I truly do. When a child gets sick, we'd willingly give our lives for them, Julia said, tears streaming down her face like they were worthless. Diego's expression grew impatient. "Why are you crying for no reason? What's wrong with the child?" he asked me coldly. I let out a bitter laugh and turned around. "Your child is right there. What does my son have to do with you?" I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm forcefully. His teeth clenched as he spoke. "He's my son too, Selena. We're not divorced yet." I mustered all my strength to pull my arm free, then slapped him hard across the face. The crowd collectively gasped, the lightness of my words landing on him like a 1,000-pound weight. "Diego, all that's missing is your signature. Or do you really want to play the ancient king and have multiple wives?" Chapter 2. The room fell deathly silent, and Julia leaned toward Diego with concern. "Diego, does it hurt? Sister-in-law, I've already explained to you, it's not what you think between me and Diego. Why can't you just forgive him?" As she spoke, she moved closer and grabbed my hand, lowering her voice so only the two of us could hear. "Guess who he would choose between us?" Before I could react, Julia stumbled backward, losing her balance and falling heavily to the ground. Everyone rushed to her side, her faint cries of pain tugging at their hearts. Diego gripped my shoulders tightly, his face dark with anger. "Selena, you've gone too far." Luis stepped in front of me, pulling me behind him and speaking calmly. "I saw everything. Selena didn't touch her." Diego raised an eyebrow and retorted, "Didn't touch her? So Julia just fell on her own? Selena, why would she have any reason to frame you? I've explained this to you countless times. I only see her as a sister. Can't you stop targeting her?" His tone carried frustration, yet he still treated me as if I were throwing a childish tantrum. Diego turned and walked toward Julia with practiced ease, as if he'd done this countless times before. I watched, numb, as he carefully lifted Julia onto his back, pushing the stroller in his hands as he brushed past me. "Selena, don't make me lose all respect for you." Turning away, I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes and ignored the curious stares from everyone around me. Without a word, I left the restaurant. Luis followed me, though I didn't realize it at the time. I headed straight to a bar, drinking myself into a stupor. Luis eventually found me, grabbing my shoulders to pull me up and take me home. Somehow, I managed to break free, using all the strength I had. In my drunken haze, I mistook him for Diego and shouted at him, "Diego, you're so disgusting. You've already had a child with another woman. What's the point of pretending to be so devoted? My love for you was wasted. Like feeding it to a dog." I walked through Hell's Gate only to finally see you clearly. Sweat and tears mingled on my forehead as I continued to cry. Luis wrapped his arms tightly around me. "Then this time, choose me. I'll never let you go again." His only response was my steady breathing as I passed out in his arms. The next morning, I woke up rubbing my pounding head, trying to clear my thoughts. A series of calls on the table caught my attention. It was Luis. "Selena, come to the hospital quickly. Your son, The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. I couldn't hear the rest of what he was saying. I rushed to the hospital as fast as I could, but I still didn't get to see my son's final moments. Luis, apologetically, said, "He tried so hard. I believe he'll find his way back to you one day." I nodded, reaching out to touch his tiny face, and immediately broke down. "It's all my fault. If I had stayed home that day, maybe he could have stayed in my womb a little longer. Maybe he wouldn't have been born prematurely. I hurt him. It's all my fault." Luis held my shoulders, staying silent. Later, after crying myself out, I fell into an exhausted sleep. I didn't know how much time had passed when my mother-in-law called. "Is Diego with you? You're divorcing him. So why are you still clinging to him?" I told Diego from the beginning to marry Julia. We know her well. "But no, he was madly in love with you. Look at him now." "You left. And you took my son's soul with you. By the end, her voice turned into a wailing accusation. My lips moved stiffly, and I replied hoarsely. Diego isn't here. Also, your grandson is gone. I hung up and blocked her number, finally restoring some peace to my world. I brought my son home and locked myself in my room for an entire day. When night fell, hunger finally forced me out in search of food. The refrigerator was empty, left with no other option. I went downstairs to the supermarket. Just as I returned home with my groceries, I ran into a drunken Diego. He rushed out of the darkness, burying his head in the crook of my neck. His warm breath mixed with salty tears as he said, "Selena, don't leave me, please." Diego's obsession didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like a sick, twisted need for control. It wasn't about me. It was about nearly 10 years of youth he wasn't ready to give up. Perhaps he didn't want to admit he was the failure in this marriage. I calmly pushed him away and led him upstairs. He followed, confused, until I placed our son's urn in his hands. "Diego, today, your son died." He looked up at me as if he hadn't heard clearly, then hesitantly touched the urn. Closing my eyes, I repeated, "Diego, our child is gone." The only bond left between us turned to ashes today. Diego, devastated, bolted out of the room. I crouched down, brushing the dust off the urn, and turned to go back inside. Perhaps it's time I start living properly. Since the day Diego left, he never contacted me again. Instead, Julia would show off on social media every few days. Today, my son started crawling. He's such a sweet boy. My son can call me mommy now. My heart is melting. Her pictures not only featured the child but also a beaming mother-in-law and Diego in the background, clearly enjoying the moment. I turned off my phone and focused on finding a job that suited me, throwing myself into work. At first, I worked in a small company doing odd tasks, but as my abilities stood out, I was promoted to the headquarters, coincidentally landing in the same department as Diego. Diego's colleagues had never seen me before because he always said, "You're pregnant, and the baby is still small," to avoid any complications. "Just stay at home." I agreed with his reasoning back then, not realizing the hidden meaning in his words. When Diego saw me at work, his expression was awkward and unnatural. I smiled brightly, pretending to be a stranger, greeting him as if I didn't know him, and quickly adapted to the company environment. That evening, we had a team dinner. Diego received a call and apologized for leaving early. The colleagues teased, "Everyone knows you have a new baby. Having a family and kids changes everything." Diego fumbled for an explanation. "She's just like a sister to me. She lost both her parents young, so I have a responsibility to look after her." "A sister? Huh? And what about your wife? Why are you keeping her hidden? By now, your wife must have had the baby, right? When's the 1-month celebration? You should treat us." Both Diego and I froze at the mention of the child, an ever-present thorn in my heart. Diego couldn't figure out how to respond, and his gaze, burning with frustration, landed on me. "Well, if he's busy, let's just go eat on our own," I said, taking the lead and throwing him a glare. As I brushed past him, I whispered through gritted teeth, "Diego, if you don't finalize our divorce soon, don't blame me for being harsh. If this goes to court, it won't look good for you." His fists clenched tightly as he grabbed his jacket and left. After the dinner, Julia was waiting for me at the entrance, holding the baby. The moment she saw me, she put on a pitiful act, her voice quivering as she spoke. "Selena, I know this is unfair to you, but this is Diego's child. Since you don't love him anymore, why don't you let him go? I really can't live without him." Then, as if on cue, she knelt down in front of me, striking a perfect pose. Her simple words made me the target of judgment. To anyone unaware of the truth, I would look like the mistress breaking up a family. My mother-in-law had already promised Julia a place in the family, wishing she could have been her daughter-in-law from the start. No matter how much Diego tried to explain that the child was just her way of coping, there was no denying that he and Julia had a child together. My colleagues all looked at me with curious and judgmental eyes, but I acted as if nothing had happened, crossing my arms and standing on the steps, looking down at Julia from above. "Julia, You shouldn't be begging me. It's Diego who's been clinging to me and refusing to divorce. You should be convincing him. Diego came out just then, hurriedly pulling Julia up from the ground. The veins on his forehead bulged. He looked furious. Julia, I told you not to come looking for her again. Do you take my words as meaningless? The moment he finished speaking, Diego walked up to me, lowering his voice. Everything is my fault. Can we please do not get divorced? Julia's eyes widened in disbelief as she screamed, on the verge of breaking down. Diego, this is your child. Are you really going to abandon us for this woman? I calmly shifted my gaze between Julia and Diego. The show was just getting started. Diego, I wanted to see how you would choose. Right on cue, the baby started wailing loudly. Diego instinctively turned in the direction of the sound. At that moment, I understood. The wind carried away my tears, along with what little love I had left for Diego. Gracefully, I walked down the steps, placing the baby securely in Diego's arms. Diego, stop struggling with them here. What right do you have to be my husband? I casually tossed my hair back, linked arms with a close colleague, and strode off. The next day at work, no one mentioned what had happened. I deleted all of Diego's contact information, leaving only his work number and email for professional communication. He kept trying to approach me with guilt-ridden gestures, but I rejected him every time. Finally, when I handed him the lawyer's letter, he agreed to the divorce. As we walked out of the civil affairs office, Julia stood nearby with the baby in her arms, and my mother-in-law was waiting in the car. I laughed, pretending to be surprised. Getting a divorce requires bringing the whole family? Diego abruptly grabbed my hand, attempting to explain with a stiff expression. Selena, can we still be friends? His face looked forlorn, his eyes reflecting the side of my face. I sharply pulled my hand away and slapped him hard. His cheek reddened and swelled instantly. Julia handed the baby to my mother-in-law and swayed toward me, ready to strike. How dare you hit him? Her hand was halfway to me when Diego intercepted it, stopping her in her tracks. Julia, stop it. This is between Selena and me. It's my fault. I glanced at Julia, who angrily withdrew her hand, her face flushed with rage. You're right. You've wronged me. So, please, stay away from me from now on. I don't want to be entangled with irrelevant people every day. My gaze lingered between Diego and Julia before finally settling on my mother-in-law, whose face was lit up with wrinkles of joy. Out of everyone, she was probably the happiest about my divorce from Diego. After all, she had wanted Julia to be her daughter-in-law from the start, and now Julia had even given her a chubby grandson. I had become a complete outsider. A few days after the divorce, when I returned to the office, Julia began showing up at the company frequently. Everyone knew Diego had a girlfriend he was about to marry. After all, they already had a child together. All that was left was to make it official. I ignored Julia's antics, burying myself in work as long as I could land this project. My performance for the second half of the year would be secure. Julia's repeated provocations were always met with my sharp comebacks, leaving her deflated. Eventually, she stopped focusing on me. The final signature for the project still required Diego's approval. Reluctantly, I knocked on the door to his office. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and without a word, he signed the document. As I turned to leave, he locked the door behind me, gripping my shoulders tightly with both hands. He held me in place, making it impossible for me to move. I tried to call for help, but his left hand clamped over my mouth, silencing me completely. Lowering his head to rest against my neck, he growled in a low, angry voice. Selena, you're my youth. Can't you forgive me just this once? No. The icy word hit him like a dagger, but he remained unmoved. A surge of possessiveness seemed to erupt within him, as if he wanted to imprison me forever. As I struggled, Julia knocked on the door. Smiling, I asked, Diego, are you sure you want to keep this up with your future wife right outside? Diego's expression didn't change, and his body continued to press closer to me. In that critical moment, my hand found the door handle, and with all my strength, I flung the door open. Julia stood there, caught off guard. She saw us in our compromising position, and the thermos she was holding fell to the floor with a loud clang. Instead of questioning Diego about his behavior, she turned her anger toward me. Selena, if you still like Diego, you could have told me. There was no need to tell me to my face that you don't love him anymore, only to seduce him behind my back. Before I could respond, Diego's voice cut through the tension like ice. Enough, Julia. I've told you before, I only see you as my sister. We will never get married. I'm willing to help you raise the child, but stop bringing up marriage. It's not going to happen. I've known Selena for almost 10 years. I know her character very well. You'd better stop coming to the company, Diego said loudly. The colleagues around us lowered their heads, whispering nervously among themselves. Julia silently shed tears, glared at me, and then left. Shortly after she left, a message popped up on my phone. Selena, don't get too cocky. Diego and I have a child, while you and he have nothing. Oh, I almost forgot. I've always thought you had better luck than me. But now it seems your child died early because you stole his blessings. Furious, I closed my eyes, trying to suppress my emotions. Then, I took a screenshot of the message and sent it to Diego. This is the good sister you're so proud of? Diego's face darkened, and he murmured a low, I'm sorry. He immediately called Julia, and I could faintly hear her weak attempts at an explanation, letting out a bitter laugh. I added Julia to my blacklist without hesitation. Even though Luis and I no longer had the bond of a doctor-patient relationship, he always found time to bring some joy into my life. One evening after work, he was waiting for me downstairs. Knowing about my pollen allergy, he had carefully chosen a collection of succulents and non-pollen-bearing plants to give me. Diego happened to see us and said sourly, such worthless things. He doesn't even know what you like. I smiled faintly and asked him, oh, so do you remember that I'm allergic to pollen? I almost forgot. You probably don't. The last time at the hospital, you nearly killed me, Diego. If you count my son, you owe me 3 lives. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my hand again, pleading desperately, let me make it up to you for the rest of my life, okay? He tried to pull me into his arms, but Luis arrived just in time and stepped between us, pulling me behind him. Sir, you already have a new family. Please stop tormenting Selena. And who are you to her? Diego asked, frowning with a cold, disdainful tone. I silently took Luis's hand, interlacing my fingers with his and lifting them up slowly. He's my boyfriend. There was a hint of defiance in my gaze. At that moment, my heart carried a bit of spite. I wanted to see what Luis truly felt about me. Diego's eyes locked onto our entwined fingers as if he were trying to burn a hole through them. But then, as expected, Julia called him. He left hastily, not forgetting to throw a parting threat. Selena is my woman. Sooner or later, I'll make sure you back off. After Diego left, I patted Luis on the shoulder. Thanks for going along with that. I'm really sorry. As I started to pull my hand away, he gripped it tightly, not letting go. Selena, do you know I've had a crush on you for years? That day, I was planning to confess to you, but someone beat me to it. But now, I don't want to give up anymore. Will you give me a chance? Choose me, and I promise you'll never regret it. It felt like something exploded in my mind with a loud boom. I took 2 steps back, nearly losing my footing on the stairs. I won't pressure you. Take your time to think it over, Luis said gently before walking away. Left alone, I spiraled into endless self-doubt. That sentence, someone else had said it to me once, but how did it turn out? Step by step, under the guise of love, he trapped me in a house. In the end, he ended up with his so-called sister and even had a child with her. That wasn't love, it was Diego's twisted possessiveness driving him to act the way he did. I didn't give Luis an answer because, deep down, I didn't know my own. Later, I was promoted to Diego's direct superior, but he managed to cause a major scandal. The company decided to fire him, and he delusionally thought I'd help him smooth things over. Selena, please talk to the boss for me. I swear I'll change. Ask him to spare me for the sake of our history. He lowered himself completely, looking every bit like a defeated man. Naturally, I refused. When you make a mistake, you have to face the consequences. Haven't you figured that out yet? The Diego you are today is no longer the Diego I once knew. At least back then. You had some sense of reason. But now, Diego said nothing more. He packed up his things and left. Not long after, his mother somehow tracked me down. Selena, please save Diego. He doesn't want to live anymore. And no matter what I say, he won't listen. She sobbed hysterically, her tears and snot mixing together in a pitiful sight. I stepped back, puzzled, and asked, "Then why don't you go find Julia? Why are you coming to me? I'm divorced from him." That only made things worse. The moment I mentioned Julia's name, she erupted. "Don't mention that shameless woman. She tried to pass off someone else's child as Diego's and wanted to get into our family." "No way." The moment Diego lost his job, she dumped the baby on us and disappeared without a word. We haven't been able to reach her for 3 days. We only found out the truth when we took the baby to the hospital for a checkup. She's ruined us. The same woman who once affectionately called Julia her daughter now treated her as their family's greatest mistake. I didn't go to Diego's house alone. I brought Luis with me. If he wanted to be part of my future, he needed to understand the past I had endured. When we arrived, Diego had already been rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Thankfully, the wounds weren't deep, and his life was saved. When he woke up, the first person he saw was me. Naturally, he assumed I'd had a change of heart. "Selena, I knew you still cared for me. Look at me now. Have I disappointed you?" I nodded, then shook my head. "Diego, you make me feel nothing but contempt." He froze for a moment, as if trying to decipher my emotions. Calmly, I continued, "I know everything. Julia cheated on you and left the child behind. How can you be so stupid? Like a complete fool? Honestly, I can't figure out why I ever liked you in the first place. If there had been any lingering sadness in my heart before, Diego's repeated favoritism toward Julia had worn my patience down to nothing." I looked at Diego lying on the hospital bed, finding the scene both tragic and strangely satisfying. I had spent 10 months carrying a child, sacrificing my youth, only to realize I had fallen for the wrong person. And now, it seemed he was finally paying the price for his mistakes. Tears filled Diego's eyes as he spoke with a choked voice. "Selena, I've lost everything. All I have left is you." I cut him off and pulled out the divorce certificate from my pocket, its bold print gleaming in the light. "See this? I carry it with me every day as a reminder of how terribly wrong I was back then. Let me make it crystal clear for you today. Do you think there's any chance for us to fix things when 3 lives lie between us?" His gaze flickered with uncertainty, and I swung a punch at his face, feeling immensely satisfied. "Dream on, scumbag!" I stormed out, leaving behind his panicked mother stomping her feet and Diego lying on the bed like a lifeless heap. As I stepped out of the hospital room, the bright sunshine greeted me. Luis didn't bring up the idea of us being together again. Instead, he said, "As long as you're happy, I'm happy. Whenever you decide you want a home, I'll always be here waiting for you." I smiled at him, then turned to glance at a swing in the distance. On it sat a little boy, waving at me before gradually fading away. I realized it must have been my child, bidding me a final goodbye. And I knew it was time for me to say goodbye to my past as well. The taxi I had called was already waiting. I quickly grabbed Luis's hand and opened the door. He smiled faintly, and I returned his smile. If only time could freeze here, just like this.